On February 20th, 2026, the federal government quietly signed an agreement that could reshape land governance across a massive portion of Metro Vancouver. Today, I'm going to break down an incredibly impactful and honestly controversial agreement. I would say something like, I'm sure you've heard of it already, but the mainstream media isn't really covering it. So if you want to stay up to date on this stuff, make sure you hit that subscribe button below. Today, we're looking at the landmark Rights Recognition Agreement between the Musqueam Indian Band and the federal government. We're going to look at the official government documents, which include the Rights Recognition Agreement itself, along with the Stewardship and Marine Management Agreement. It's a huge amount of material to cover, and the stakes for the 2 million people living within this Metro Vancouver area could not be higher. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the text of the agreement itself, because the historical context laid out in the opening pages is incredibly intriguing. The agreement establishes that the Musqueam people have a continuous 8,000-year history in the lower mainland of British Columbia. We're talking about an oral history that goes back so far, it literally depicts a time where the Fraser River Delta was just water. The geographical scale defined in the text is what immediately jumps out at you when you read it. The agreement outlines Musqueam territory as spanning all the way from the North Shore Mountains straight through the Fraser River Delta. It encompasses all of Vancouver, Burnaby, Richmond, and extends out into the center of the Strait of Georgia. So we aren't talking about a remote tract of wilderness here. This is a massive, highly developed, densely populated, and incredibly expensive piece of global real estate. And driving this entire agreement is a core Musqueam legal philosophy. It emphasizes that this law is about working together in a spirit of collaboration and coexistence. Now, the text makes a very specific and very important legal distinction. This is not a treaty, so it's not a final land claim. It does not establish a final land claim in the traditional sense that extinguishes rights. Instead, it formally recognizes Musqueam's inherent Aboriginal rights and title, and it heavily references UNDRIP. I've done separate videos on what UNDRIP and DRIPA are, so I'm not going to cover that in this video. If you haven't seen those ones, you should go watch them. So it's recognizing rights, but it's not a closed book treaty. It's an incremental step, and we see how that plays out in the real world. Immediate changes are outlined in the next area of the document, the revenue sharing. There's a brand new revenue sharing agreement taking federal lease revenues from the Vancouver International Airport, YVR, one of the busiest airports in the country. The government is taking a portion of the money generated from YVR and sharing it directly with the Musqueam. Alongside that financial piece, there is a massive stewardship and marine management agreement. And this isn't just a symbolic gesture, it goes far beyond that. It gives the Musqueam a joint formal role in managing marine emergencies, pollution incidents, and habitat restoration across their entire region. It establishes working groups where the Musqueam and federal ministries have to work together. It creates governance structures that require collaboration and consensus in certain decision-making processes. If we look at the broader implications of this document, it represents a profound shift away from the old assumptions where the government simply managed what it called crown land from the top down. What this agreement explicitly outlines is a move toward legal pluralism. It states that Musqueam laws and legal orders now exist alongside and independently of Canada's legal system. Taking a massive urban center like Metro Vancouver and shifting it toward decision-making authority while establishing parallel legal systems is wild. When questioned about it, our Premier David Eby said he didn't know about the agreement. Then a photo was released shortly after of him at the signing of the agreement. Once the photo came out, he said something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, well, I wasn't briefed on what the agreement was." The federal government then came out and publicly stated that he was fully informed on the agreement. Even if he didn't know about it, how could you not? Is that not your literal job? To be aware of and understand things that might massively impact the province? And this 40-page document was negotiated in near total secrecy without any public consultation. The public did not see any drafts. The federal government is suddenly handing over joint decision-making authority in key areas across the lower mainland to a First Nation band. That decision fundamentally impacts the lives, businesses, and properties of the roughly 2 million residents who had no say in the negotiations. So, what does this mean for regular everyday people who own homes, specifically private property owners? Why might joint management be an issue for non-Indigenous homeowners? Now, before I get into this, I have seen a couple cases online of people referencing the trailer park in Comox and the docks in Sechelt, and I simply disagree with using those as examples. The trailer park in Comox is on reserve land, which means there's a lease. If they don't want to renew the lease, they have every right to do so. If you bought into leasehold property and didn't know that, it's your fault, or the person who helped you buy there. The docks in Sechelt are also part of a reserve. The real issue lies within fiduciary duty, which is a legal obligation to act in someone's best interest. Like any government, a First Nation government has a fiduciary obligation to act in the best interest of its citizens. It does not have the same democratic accountability to non-members. This creates a governance structure where decisions affecting millions of residents could be influenced by authorities those residents have no democratic mechanism to vote out. If a joint management board decides that you can't build a retaining wall or you have to remove your dock, you can't vote out a chief later on. You have no democratic mechanism to push back. The very concept of private property in Canada is under attack by these agreements. Here's where it gets even more alarming. I want to talk about Tom Isaac. Tom Isaac is not a politician looking for votes. He's one of the top Aboriginal law experts in North America. He literally helped the Canadian government set up the territory of Nunavut back in the 90s, so he knows what he's talking about. He has spent his entire career operating in this highly specific, highly complex area of law. And his legal analysis of the Musqueam Agreement is very sobering. It begs the question, if top legal experts see this glaring conflict over property rights, wouldn't the federal government's lawyers see this too? Isaac confirms that the fear around property rights isn't just right-wing paranoia. He points to a massive precedent about what Aboriginal title actually means under Canadian law. It is the exclusive right to land, meaning the Crown retains absolutely no beneficial interest in the land. Beneficial interest means the right to actually use, enjoy, and profit from the land. If a First Nation holds Aboriginal title, they hold exclusive beneficial interest. And Isaac clearly states that, legally speaking, Aboriginal title cannot peacefully coexist with regular private property. They clash. You cannot have two different entities holding exclusive rights to the same piece of land. I want to touch on another key term, which is indefeasible title. In plain terms, if you have indefeasible title as a homeowner, it means you have the ultimate unchallengeable receipt for your land. No one can swoop in and say they have a better underlying claim to it. But Aboriginal title makes a similarly absolute claim. This is where the legal conflict begins to emerge. David Eby and other government officials have said, don't worry, private homes are completely safe. The Musqueam have also publicly stated that they do not intend to take private property. They say the agreement only applies to Crown land. But if you actually read the agreement through a strict legal lens, the text does not explicitly exclude private property. There is zero distinction between private property and Crown land. There is nothing in the actual agreement itself that separates or protects private property. If the government truly intended to protect private homes and provide certainty to the market, it would have been incredibly simple. They could have written a single sentence stating that fee simple private property is excluded from this recognition, but they didn't do that. Again, the map of the territory included in the agreement covers a massive portion of Metro Vancouver. By leaving that explicit protection out, the government has created a cloud on title. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the frustration lies. But first, I think it's very important to note that there should be almost no blame on the Musqueam for this. They negotiated the best possible deal they could for their people. It's exactly what they should do, and it's exactly what you would do if you were given the same opportunity. The blame falls solely on the Canadian government, both federally and provincially. Our current leaders are throwing gas on the fire of an already incredibly fragile British Columbia economy. BC is staring down a $13.5 billion deficit. Western economies run on certainty. Investors need to know that the land under their project is secure. Banks need to know the title cannot be challenged. Without that certainty, capital leaves. If you have a cloud over property titles in a major metropolitan area like Vancouver, the economic fallout isn't a future problem. It's immediate. The effects happen right now. Capital flees. Major infrastructure projects like a new hospital or a hotel stall out because banks and lenders simply will not finance them if the underlying land title is legally contested. And it's the everyday wage earners who suffer. The economy stagnates, jobs disappear, and basic social services aren't funded because the tax base shrinks. Another frustrating part is that the government actually has a legal tool built into the system to balance these interests, and they're pretending it doesn't exist. In the Delgamuukw decision, the Supreme Court explicitly wrote that the government can legally infringe on Aboriginal title if they have a compelling and substantial societal objective. And they listed the settlement of foreign populations as one of the examples, which is the court's way of describing historical homesteading and the granting of fee simple title as a valid reason to infringe on Aboriginal title. So the highest court in the land gave the government a clear legal mechanism to say, yes, we recognize your Aboriginal title, but we are legally infringing on it here in this specific city to protect existing private property owners. Yet the government is deliberately choosing not to use that legal defense. Instead, they are signing vague agreements that legally conflict with the realities of the real estate market, leaving everyone in the dark. So what does this all mean? Because whether you own a home, rent an apartment, or just buy groceries and participate in the Canadian economy, an agreement of this magnitude fundamentally shifts the ground beneath your feet. It's easy to dismiss this as just a debate for boardrooms and politicians looking for sound bites, but this agreement is going to dictate how one of Canada's most vital economic hubs functions, builds, and grows for the next century. What we are witnessing is not just a local real estate dispute. It is a profound structural collision of two completely different systems for viewing the world. On one hand, you have a legal and cultural philosophy focused on collaborations and long-term environmental stewardship, and on the other hand, you have a modern Western economic system, a system that relies on the absolute certainty of private property rights, that unchangeable, indefeasible title. Without that certainty, banks don't lend money, developers don't build homes, and the wealth generation that funds a modern city slows down. It raises an important question. How much economic pain or uncertainty is a society willing to take in the name of historical reconciliation? The current path this government has chosen, this middle ground of vague agreements and hidden clauses, is a lose-lose scenario. By creating legal uncertainty without a clear macroeconomic plan to manage the fallout, they are risking economic stagnation that will ultimately hurt both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Behind it is a delicate and incredibly high-stakes balancing act. So what can you, the everyday Canadian, do about all this? Well, it starts at the polls. A provincial election is in 2028, but when the time comes, go vote. I'm not telling you who to vote for, but in the province of BC, if you care about private property rights, I can tell you right now that the NDP does not. Too many of us choose the easy way out and do nothing. And honestly speaking, I was the same for a long time. But I've had enough. Your one single vote may feel insignificant, but it's better than nothing. And that's all I have for you on that matter. Something is better than nothing. Anyway, we started this deep dive looking at a single document, the Musqueam Rights Recognition Agreement. It's a bold commitment to shared environmental management, but at the same time, it's a legal earthquake. An agreement that has legal experts sounding the alarm over unprecedented consequences for the certainty of private property and the broader Canadian economy, which leaves us with a massive amount of information to process. Personally, I don't see things getting resolved anytime soon. This will likely remain an unknown for the next decade. Another quick question I have is, what about the Cowichan lands? The map shown for the Musqueam Agreement goes directly over the Cowichan lands in Richmond that were given Aboriginal title. So what happens there? Do the Cowichan need to consult with the Musqueam? Does the government now need to consult with both of them? I don't know, but I want to leave you with one final lingering thought. We've talked a lot about international frameworks like UNDRIP. These frameworks essentially push toward land returning to Indigenous peoples and granting them greater control. But at the same time, our economy relies on the absolute certainty of private land ownership. We need that certainty to generate the tax base that funds healthcare, public schools, and infrastructure. So, if you zoom all the way out, the question becomes this: is it actually possible for a modern nation to fully implement both of these realities at the same time without fundamentally redesigning what the nation even is? We're going to be watching this play out in real time as these agreements continue to be signed. And if you're wondering how this affects your specific situation, there's a Calendly link below. I'd be happy to go over it with you.